put lots of handy little yellow charts around the combine. Well, not lots of them, a couple of them. They're fairly important things, especially the Lube chart. They'll point out where every one of the zerks are, so you know where you have to go to find the grease zerks. This one, located right down here. Some of the machines, they'll be located up here on the back of the gull wing door. Sometimes you'll have another one down here on the panel right on the side. So there's going to be several ones located throughout the machine. Spend a little bit of time to get familiar with them. There's a few zerks we're going to look at here in a bit that look like the head of a bolt, or the threaded part of a bolt, and somebody just had too long of a bolt in there. That's actually a zerk on the other side, and we've seen a lot of them get missed. One thing I've done is, on that handout, if you got it earlier, I made a separate Lube chart. This is a revised chart that we've kind of gone through, we've more or less adopted here. And for different reasons. Some of the reasons being we find some things that aren't getting the grease that we feel it should, and so we want a little more grease in there, or maybe we want it more often than they're saying. So we'll just kind of start at the top of that. When we come to some of them on this side of the machine, we'll look at them, and then we'll go to the other side. So hopefully when we're all done, you will have seen all the zerks on here. When we do the 9600 or 9610, I won't crawl up in the bulk tank and show everybody where there's two hiding up there, but we'll have somebody hop up there and show you if you want to see exactly where they are. So starting with the things that you daily need to do, basically on these S-Series combines and all the STS combines, we're pretty much down to greasing our reel every day. Most everything else we're going to be able to get by with every other day and once a week. When I say once a week, roughly it's a 50-hour week. If you're putting on 70 hours a week, then you might want to hit them twice a week. But really, if we stop and look at the hour meter on the combine, you're doing good to get 50 hours in a week, unless you're one of the people who really does get out there at 7 and is cutting by 7:30 and don't shut off till 9:30, and you unload on the go and you don't stop for anything. Then you might get more hours in that. But normally what we see is, when we're all done, it's about a 9 or 10 hour worth of separating time on the combine a day. The knife head is another thing we do want you to watch. There's two zerks down there, and on the newest Draper header, I think it was we were looking at, they took and got rid of one of the zerks, so I need to find out what's going on with that. On the knife box, we no longer have the old wobble box on the 600 series header that shook the whole end of the combine, and it was just flopping around back and forth. We do have an elliptical drive now, and so, Kelly, you want to pop that cover open there? You guys can look at the drive if you haven't seen one. It's more like what we've had on swathers and stuff. It's a smooth drive, it's a gear in there running around a pinion gear, and so it's just running it back and forth. So there is a zerk on the top of that, and I think there's a little yellow chart on there. Some were saying it only wants so much grease. Maybe they moved it on the back here. 10 shots every 200 hours is what they're wanting on that box. We do not want that box overfilled. If you get too much grease in there, you can't pop the seal out. Haven't had much problems with it. For what we've seen on knife drives, this knife drive has held up really well compared to that. It came out on the 900 series Drapers. Yes?
Jim, I have a question. On these greasers, you know, you were saying like once a week or whatever. I make a point to go through every day and give them at least 1-2 pumps each zerk every day.
Okay.
Is that a good thing, or is that not enough?
The best thing about that is you're looking at your whole combine every day. And later on we'll talk about that. Well, yeah, at the start of the year, I guess I did write on there, grease complete machine and inspect. Because when we were running 9600s and we had to grease so much of it every couple days, we saw a lot of problems before they ever happened, or as they were first starting to happen. Now, we don't walk around our machine unless you go blow it off at night or in the morning. We hop on it in the morning, we go back to it and grab our grease gun, maybe somebody else greased that, we put fuel in it, check the engine oil, glance at the hydraulic oil level, and off we go. Which is really nothing wrong with that, but if you spend the time to go walk around it and look at every greaser, if you have a bearing starting to go out or something giving you a problem, you're going to see that. So from that respect, I think we see more major problems that could have been prevented because we're not greasing it. And so, yeah, going through it every day. There's a few things that you really don't have to hit every day, 1 or 2 shots, but visually looking at them, you're not going to hurt anything by giving it the extra grease on these.
Well, because I always just figure you take a shower every day, why doesn't your combine want some lube every day?
True. You eat breakfast every day too.
Yeah.
We feel it, but yeah, we quit greasing it. Quit giving it its vitamins, I guess. So, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. People that do that, I think they're going to find more things before they have a problem with them. That's why some of these things that we've added, like on the weekly, the unloading auger, that was a 50 hours greasing. But one thing I've done on that, I'd like to see that greased in 2 different spots. Now you go to the new combines and there's no grease zerks on this combine for your unloading auger, so you can't do that. But if you had a 50 series, 60 series combine, it still has a grease zerks for the unloading auger. So if you grease it in a couple different spots, that way you don't have it bind up. On some of the 9600s, we've got to where we've seen them, the unloading auger binding up because mine, it just packs full of, well, it gets some moisture in there in the turret and then rusts up, and then it just doesn't spin. We haven't had problems. What's that?
On the bottom or the top?
The bottom. The 3 or 4 zerks that they normally plumb out to the bottom, that's where we go. But at the same token, we have that zerk on the unloading auger gear case. The upper gear case, there's one line running up there, and that's something that gets missed. And people don't realize that that bolt, it's roughly a 5/8 bolt, has a hole drilled in it, and that bolt will break. And on the older combines where it actually had the grease zerk in it, if you grease that a couple times through the year, you would have noticed that the bolt broke instead of waiting until the end of the harvest and realizing it broke. So, one thing I forgot to mention on this knife drive down here, that bearing on the end, coming out of the knife drive where it bolts up and then your knife head bolts up, there are 2 different lengths of that. What we found was some of the earlier Draper headers, or the first year or 2 of the 630 headers, customers may have came in to get a new one because the bearing went out and then they put it on and they were given the wrong one. We need to have a serial number of your header for that because they did change that. And the long one will hit and the short one you won't quite get the head bolted on right if you get the wrong ones on. So make sure our parts guys are giving you the right one. So just be aware of that. With that unloading auger gear case we were talking about, back to that. I do have it down as a 400 hour zerk still, and that's good enough for it as long as you make sure that bolt isn't breaking. Something else right here, we have the reel pump bearing. That's hidden back behind the tire, and it's where you have that hydraulic pump that drives your reel. And it's a single pulley on the 10s and the standard duty STSs. And if you want to look at the 10 later on when we're there, that zerk is in the center of the pulley. You have to have it turned right to where you can find it. That is a zerk that we find gets missed a lot. I think they have it down as a 400 hour zerk. Yeah, 400 hours. That isn't enough out here. It really needs to be getting hit at least weekly. That's a bearing that we'll find will go out, and if we can prevent it from going out by making sure we get the grease to it early enough, we really want to do that.
How many pokes?
If you give it 5 or 6 shots a week, that's going to be good. And you have a bearing that's roughly this big around, and a cavity in between the 2 bearings that's about 1 1/4 inch, 1.5 inches. But you have a shaft going through it, so it isn't a great big hole. But if you get enough in there when it starts spinning, it will get it loose or get it ran out. But some of the grease can leak out after a time. So that's on all the combines. A couple other things. Feeder house drive lines here. Go right by them. Now they've gone to sealed bearings in those also, but originally they were 50-hour zerks. And some of them have some zerks. They look just like a molding flaw in there basically, but it's actually a zerk. I don't know too many people that actually spend the time to grease their driveline shields. Most people end up taking them off, but that's because they started falling apart. You get a little bit of grease in some of these slide parts on them, they do seem to last a little longer. So something else to look at.
Is mine the only one where that zerk is on the sliding part? where you have to align the holes up there.
I know. But it will all spin, so you'll have to find it. And you might have
But
to
on
speed.
mine, when the shaft spins inside, it wears off the top of the
zerk.
grease zerk.
So
it only lasts like about 4 days, and then you can't grease it again.
Oh, no, normally I've seen them lasting a little longer than that. Normally they'll last at least a year. But this is a part that we see a lot of people neglect. If you have a fixed feeder house, so non-lateral tilt stuff, that shaft does very little movement, and so it will actually bind up and won't move. If you have lateral tilt or a hillside machine, this shaft is always moving, and it stays freed up a lot better. But we've gone to machines that they've been coupled up, ran all year that way, and we have to pound them apart to get them unhooked so we can get the combine in. So a little bit of lube there would make things a little handier.
And the other one I didn't see on your list is that upper variable speed pulley.
Yeah, I'm looking, trying to see if I forgot that, and I was telling Trudy earlier that I go through this every year and try to make sure I get them, and I did forget those. So let me write that
On
down.
mine, I grease it like every 2 days, and those bearings still don't seem to last in that upper pulley.
Yeah, and you have the lower down here too,
Yeah.
and they're, I believe they're 400 hours.
You've got here STS variable drives under the 200 hours.
Yeah, that's the rear variable. So the feeder house variable drives, we do want to see those at least weekly. If you ever rent a machinery link combine, it's going to have a big placard several places saying you will grease this with synthetic grease daily, and they tell you how many pumps they want on it. And why they're wanting synthetic is they're wanting it to stick in there better, and why they're wanting it daily is they're thinking everybody's running a big corn head on it, and it takes abuse on the positive torque drive down here. So we're not running the big corn head. We don't have nearly the drive tension on it, but we still would like to see it greased at least weekly, a lot more than what Deere is recommending, and that's just so we can keep the life on these better. We are seeing some of the 60 series combines that haven't been greased as much through some of the changes and stuff. Yes, they're louder than they have been in the past. They're heavier duty drives, and so we're just needing to take care of them a little better and hope they stay working good. The 9610, we've had very little problem with them, and so I don't want to scare you guys, but I've seen more problems on the 60 series than we ever did on the 9600.
I've got a 9600 with 3600 hours. I've never fooled with the variable speeds.
Yeah.
And on my 9760, I've changed those bearing once, and they're about due to be changed again.
We are running a lot more pressure on the belts than we've ever ran just to take that torque, and so they've changed things on the 9600s also to get. You'll look at the belt, and the belt's a lot thicker and wider than it's ever been in the past, and so and it comes down to what we're driving. And this belt here is about twice the size of the belt on the machine over there. So yeah, due to the tensions on them. And we'll come back and talk about this more later, too. So we have this we're going to add. Then we'll walk around, goobered up there that you really can't see it good. Cleaning fan shivs on the other side. We're not talking the bearings down here on the fan. The bearings, if you go through and get those, you could get those every 400 hours, you'd be okay. But on the variable shivs, we do want to get those hit weekly, just because we're moving that fan speed around more. If we're not moving the fan speed around more, we need to move it around more just to work the grease through things. So something good to play with a little bit, just to keep things from binding up in there. Steering and rear axle. Basically, I like to hit everything on the steering and rear axle part at least once a week. The rotor bearing, we'll go over to the other side and look at here in a bit. But Paul,
Yeah.
you want to come up here and tell us about greasing the variable?
Oh boy.
Paul's been out to your place, or some people's places, and he's greased them, or people called up and said, I grease it like you tell me to, and I get a great big mess of grease all over the place. Paul's actually came up with a way to prevent the mess.
So on the variable, you'll run your shiv all the way closed down this outer shiv here. You'll have a zerk and a plug on each shiv inside, in the inner one and the outer one here. On the one that has the zerk, it's 25 pumps. Or no, 40 pumps, I'm sorry, backwards. 40 pumps on the one that has the zerk. The plug you'll untake out and put 25 pumps into it. And then you'll want to leave the plug out. And you'll want to go up in your, what I like to do is I'll put my rotor speed to slow speed, just to keep any movement down that I can. I'd recommend doing it like in the morning if you can. Cold weather is the best. You do it out in the middle of the day and the heat is just it's gonna run out like oil. So you want to run up your cab, engage your separator, and then speed your separator all the way up, slow it all the way back down, and then you'll come back and you'll put that pipe plug back in. Don't leave a zerk in there. Then you'll start greasing that one also. You don't want to do that. Basically once a year is what we're recommending on that. And I came up with a little nice little gadget. Once you do that once, you'll probably get real tired of it and never want to do it again. I mean, it's a big mess. You'll spend about an hour, hour and a half cleaning all that oil up. It's grease, but it does act like oil. I mean, it gets real thin, just throws it all over your side of your belt, all over the side of your door here. If you want to, you can come talk to me. I'll show you a little thing I made. Basically, I'll put it in there where the pipe plug is after I grease it. Pull that zerk back out. I'll screw it in there, and it has a relief on it, so it'll catch all that grease. So then you don't have any mess anymore. I've done it a few times and had no problems with it. So if you have any questions or if you want to see how to make that little thing, just come talk to me, and it'll save you a lot of time cleaning that up. So, but we need to do that every year, the year.
Yeah, they have that listed at 200 hours. Some of the STSs, I think you'll see that they show 400 hours on that too. If you do it like Paul's saying, and how the book shows, of keeping that plug out and running it in and out, you don't have to worry about it. You can do it more often than that, but you really don't need to. But Jeff, that's one of the spots you don't want to over-grease. Right. That's why they do have plugs in them. But like Paul said, we see people put zerks in them, and what goes on if you grease it up and get it overfilled, it won't allow the positive torque portion of that to keep the pressure on the belt, and it will slip. And then eventually it'll pop one of the inner seals out, and then it'll send all that grease all over your belt. And then you get to either spend a couple hours cleaning the belt or replace the belt. And by the time you have to replace the belt and see the cost of it, you'll spend a couple hours cleaning the belt. So just be aware, we need to keep that grease, we need to watch over it, but we don't want to overdo it right there.
And that was how often?
That's every 200 hours, or some will show 400 hours. If you get that once a year, we're going to be okay in it. There again, that's something in the wheat. We don't put a lot of pressure on that. If you start running corn, something that's green and viney, or if you do have a lot of green wheat or green stalks that you're cutting, yeah, we're running a lot more pressure in the rotor. One thing with the 9870s and then these S's, they do have a pressure gauge or a pressure sensor for that rotor, so they know how much it is. Any of the combines that have auto feed rate on them have a pressure sensor in there, or Canadian combines will have that on there also. So you'll be able to, or the machine will know what the pressure is on there, and so the more pressure in the rotor, the more that positive torque drive is working. Something else on the weekly, right back here we have our chopper jack shaft. They've changed it on the 70 series to where they don't have the grease zerks in it anymore. Is it all oil in there, Paul, or cornhead grease? Do you remember? Okay. But all the prior machines, even the early 70s, still had grease zerks back there. We like to keep that once a week. The thing runs hot back there. We got a lot of pressure going down to our choppers because unlike corn in this situation, we're running them on high. In corn, they're going to run them on low, and here we put lots through it, and we rely a lot on that jack shaft to get the power down to that, and it will run hot on there. So I want to keep those greased up good. While we're right here, even though it's 400 hours, on your final drives, you have a zerk hidden down in there. You have to reach in. It's normally at the top. It might be towards the front or the back, depending on which side it is. A lot of people overlook it. Some people don't even know it's in there. It's 400 hours zerk unless you're in muddy conditions, which we don't have to worry about. But a lot of people have looked at that zerk in the past and saying 400 hours, we don't need much there, a couple shots, that's good. The only problem is it goes into a line that's about 14 inches long, about a 3/8 line. before it gets down to the bearing. We have failed some final drives here. I don't know if we did any last year, but I remember one a couple years ago that we had failed and opened it up, and the grease had never reached the bearing. And the Combine was like a 1990, so it ran for probably close to 20 years before it failed, and so that was with the factory grease, so we did good. But had we greased it enough to where we actually had grease down to the bearing, we would have been okay. So I wrote on there 12 to 14 shots a year, and that's just so we're getting it greased. If we get it greased with the 12 to 14 shots here when it's new, or if it's a used one before it gets delivered to you, and then the next year you get it, hey, we should be getting pretty close to having grease on that bearing. So, or hopefully it did have grease on it by then. So watch that. Primary countershaft U-joints, it's just a slide on the drive line up here. 50 series might have had grease zerks on them. When we talked about the 9600, 9610s, all those had grease zerks. Unless you change your bearings, then they went to sealed bearings. Tailing slip clutch on the other side, we'll look at that. Cleaning fan bearings, that's the shaft bearings here, and on the other side. Discharge beater, there's a bearing that is right behind this pulley here, and they normally run it out. And not sure where they, oh, right there is where they ran it out. If you look at some of the 50 series, they didn't have all those ran out, so you had to know you had to zerk back in there. And then there was a crop accelerator that right up here, and I think I've got that on my list too. So anyhow, that's another 400 hours zerk. That's one on the other side we'll be looking at. So we'll go ahead and walk around towards the other side, and we'll look at one more zerk over here before we get all the way there. There's a pulley up here. And inside that upper pulley, that's the engine power shaft. There's a grease zerk in there. It's hidden up there. Right now I can't see it, so that means I got to roll this belt around to get it to the right location. That's a 400 hour zerk. And that's on all the Combines Deere's had, or all the since the 9600s. So a lot of people aren't aware of that, but
Which pulley is it on, Jim?
it's on the
upper
main
one?
drive one coming off the engine gear case.
Okay.
So it's right underneath that triple belt, and we'll find one to show you. If not, we'll turn one around to make sure you guys can see it.
And that's in between the pulleys, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, in our tailing slip clutch, we do have a zerk up in here for our slip clutch, and that's one thing that slip clutches are always hard to decide if you're going to grease or not, because if you over grease them, you're out in the middle of the field throwing dirt on them to get back to your service truck so you could clean them. But if you under grease them, this one in particular will weld itself to the shaft and then it won't slip. I think, Jerry, you've ran into taking this apart and having to press it and it didn't come apart. Well, we've seen it on several of them. So it's something on the 50 series, and early on we actually had them slipping more than we wanted due to some issues in the shoe going up and down hills and stuff. And so this is something that will slip here, especially if you're in the hills. So you don't want it over greased, but you want to make sure that it will spin. It wouldn't hurt to take this one apart just to make sure it would spin, especially if your machine's 3 or 4 years old. It doesn't take much to buzz these 4 bolts off and at least get the slip clutch portion turning on it.
So what's the magic number then?
The magic number of grease, hit it once a year, make sure it's free, and then if you give it a couple shots at the beginning of the year, you should be good.
Okay, a couple of pumps then.
Yeah. Here's our cleaning fan that we were talking about, our upper and lower variable that we were wanting you to do every week. From here, we'll go up and show you the zerks that look like bolts.
Jim, since you're here,
I like to be able to slide the whole chain back and forth. I don't want to be able to pull it out, but if you can slide it left and right easily, then that's fine. If you have to, I think this one here is extremely tight. One of these machines is really tight. So we're going to loosen it up before it leaves. But if it was a brand new chain, lots of grease in it, I'll run them a little tighter just so you don't have to adjust them at the end of your first day, because they will get all that cosmoline out of the chain and stretch out a little bit. But once that's been done, just like to slide them back and forth.
okay.
Okay, if you look up here, there's 2 Zerks up here. I'll move out of the way and let you guys get in and see that. These ones here are shiny, so you can see them. They haven't been painted over like most of them, and so they actually do resemble a Zerk. But if they've been painted, you look in there and you think it's just the end of a bolt sticking out there. One of them goes to your beater bearing, or not beater, crop accelerator, and the other goes to your rotor bearings. So just be aware of those. Make sure you know about them.
All right.
And they're there. And like I said, I've gone to machines and they're several years old and they're still painted good and green. So watch that. Rotor bearings, well, we're talking about greasing that. We have that on a weekly deal. They have it on 400 hours. Why I like to go weekly is we've seen some of these bearings go out before the end of a year. And so it has been something we've seen more on 70 series combines than we have anything else. We have put some DTACs into deer on it to let them know what we're seeing, and I haven't seen any changes on anything yet. But I'll visit with Don more on it. He's new, so he may not know some of my things that I'm running into. But we just want to make sure we have that grease good and we're not ignoring it. We've had it where people have heard some strange rumblings and noises on the combine, and we get them to go grease that, and it will quiet right down. So at that point, we know keep it greased good, and they can finish harvest up, and then it's something we'll have to look at after harvest.
Where does that grease at?
Rotor bearing. It's one of these 2 up there. I'm not sure which one.
Those 2 that look like bolts?
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Thank you. So, there is one other slip clutch. I don't know if I put it on here. I didn't. The conveyor auger drive. Right down in here, there's a slip clutch on the drive down here that has a Zerk on it. So, any other questions?
The conveyor auger grease now.
No.
Are you talking the slip clutch here?
Yeah, right in there. There's one. No, on these STSs we do not have a wooden block like the Walker machines do. They're all sealed bearings across everything. So, Paul.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about the reverser gear case oil levels on the new machines?
Okay.
You can do it from there. You can just tell people.
On the feeder house reverser gear case, basically what we need to do is level that. When you have the header off the front, like over here, we'll look at this one right here. That should be parallel to the ground. So right where your hooks are, that bar should be parallel to the ground. That's where you actually need to check the level. The book says all the way up in the air. We found out, but there's a certain capacity they're also calling for. And if you check with it all the way up in the air, you're actually going to overfill it. So the right capacity is actually having that. I think I put a DTAC in with deer and talked with them about it also, is having that actually parallel to the ground. So right where your hooks are, make that parallel to the ground, and that will be the proper capacity for that engine gear case, or for that reverser gear case there. If you're all the way up, you're going to overfill it. All the way down, you're going to underfill it. So it needs to be level to the ground.
One thing they have on there, they do have a cooler built onto these newer reverser gear cases for the high capacity drives and stuff. So that's why it's not just like our 9600s where you checked one level and it was always right there. So here, if it's up too high, it's ran to a different part of the system, or if it's down all the way, then it's all drained to one. So be aware of that when you're looking at them.
So how often do you change the oil?
I don't know. In the dry land where we don't have that high load in them, I'd say probably that we're going a couple thousand hours before we're actually going in there and changing it. I know, like Kyle, down there with your corn machines, you guys are into them more often. Actually, in the corn machines, you're into them more often because you're tearing something up. So then you're forced to change your oil. But here, honestly, we haven't had the problems with them, so we haven't been able to say, hey, you need to go in and change the oil at a certain time frame. So, but speaking of oils, on the 70 series and also on the S series, they have changed. It used to be you had 10-weight engine oil or low viscosity hydraulic oil that you would run in your system, and some machines had one, some machines had another. Then they get mixed. People didn't know what to use on them. Now you get to use regular hydraulic oil, so you don't have to worry about what goes where. And yet now that we say that in this new S series combine, it's regular hydraulic oil, but it's red. So I'm not sure what it is in there, but it's supposed to be regular hydraulic oil. That's what we're going to put in it. So.
Can you mix those together if you got one in there and the other?
If you have the 10-weight and the low vis, yes, you can mix those. Yeah. If you have the regular hydraulic oil, we prefer you not to mix them. We've ran regular hydraulic oil in some of these 9600s, 9610s. We haven't had problems with it. I don't recommend it. I think where you get the problems is if you're running those machines in the cold doing the corn. We park our machines end of September, and we normally don't see them unless we're working on them in the winter. So we're not going to have that thick oil issue like they would have in the corn. But so a couple other things on the STS. We talked about the service intervals, greasing the rotor, oil levels. We talked about some of those. One other thing on the oil levels, the finals. There are several plugs on the back of the finals. The top one is a breather, and then make sure you get the right plug for your oil level, because if you fill one of the upper ones to your oil level, they're way over full. And you'll notice quickly when you start going down the road. Another thing that we've ran, some of the transmissions, the regular 3-speed transmissions, if we're in a lot of hills, sometimes we'll come out of that plug and we'll put a 90-degree elbow on it, and we'll fill them up to the top of that 90-degree elbow, just because when we're in the hills, we'll shift over to the side, and then we could run the chance of starving the little pump in there. If you had a Rayco leveler on it, and they put like a 3-inch little pipe on there, and so they really raise that level. But
how far?
They raise it, I think, about 2.5 to 3 inches.
It's about 3 inches.
Yeah.
But what's the oil level?
They wanted it to go all the way up there, is what Rayco wanted. But if you do that, as soon as you take it out and road it, you're going to spit a bunch of oil out again. So we normally found that about the 1.5 to 2 inches, you don't spit oil out. Okay. So that's why if you have a level am machine and you're running in a lot of hills, if you want to put that 90-degree elbow on it and take it to the top of the elbow, you've only raised it about 1 inch. And we haven't had any problems with them. Didn't have any problems when they were running down on the level, or the normal plug either, but we figured if Rayco's wanting it in the hills, we haven't had a problem doing it if we know they're in a lot of hills. Another thing, the mass flow impact sensor plate up in the top of the bulk tank. If you want, we could show you guys that later. It's when you drop your loading auger down, it's a plate the width of your elevator, altogether probably 18 inches long, has a curve in it, and that's attached to the mass flow sensor. And on the back side of that mass flow sensor, there's a little cavity about 1.5 to 2 inches, and the whole width of that plate. And that could get filled up with junk and chaff and stuff. And after a while, you'll see that if you're doing the yield monitoring, it isn't accurate anymore. That's because that's packed full of junk behind it. So when it packs up, it can't get the vibration it needs, and so then totals are off. So that's something you do want to clean. Make that part of your normal maintenance on them, as far as cleaning them, and once a week get it blown out. If you go into a lot of green weeds or really small things, let's say you did get into a bunch of kochia and you had all those little tiny kochia seeds in there, they'll get stuck behind that, along with other green things. So be aware of that. Wheat normally doesn't get stuck there too bad. If you have the older yield monitoring system where you had the side mount moisture sensor, then you need to clean that out after you've gone through lots of green weeds. If you're good dry wheat all harvest, you'll go all harvest, you'll never have a problem with it. But if your last 2 days you're in stuff that's green because you're wanting to get it done, it will mat up on that and it can plug it up easier. If you have a 60 series combine or late 50s, and then the 70s, they had their moisture sensor mounted in the bulk tank. You can look at this one. It looks like a torpedo launcher, big silver thing. Those ones, they normally didn't have the problem plugging up with green weeds, but they could get stuff behind the plunger setup, and then they wouldn't move back and forth they didn't seem to be as accurate as what we used to have. So for those of you who do a lot of that, you'll be happy to see on the S-Series combines we went back to something like we used to have that we were really happy with our moisture. So it's mounted on the side of the elevator over there. It comes apart a whole lot easier than the old 9600, 9610 sensors did. But on the torpedo launcher one, if you need to clean that out, when you drop that elevator down, there's a bolt on the end of the plunger. Takes a 10mm wrench, screw that off, and then you'll see the area underneath the plunger about 2x6 or 2x7, something like that. With one rod coming through that, blow that out good, and that will get all the junk out of that area, so that plunger will be able to retract and go back down in. Okay, any other questions on the STS? Comments?
Just a question.
Yeah.
What grease would you recommend
Okay.
that we use? Is there one that can do everything on a combine?
Yeah, the polyurea grease is what I've been happiest with on them. If you're willing to spend the money on it, you could go to the synthetic grease. It's about 3 times as much as the polyurea. But the other thing, with the synthetic, we have had people go in there and they'll extend their service intervals. They'll go twice as long on it. When we're talking about the walker machine, walker blocks is a big thing on those, and we are greasing them daily. Guys who went to the synthetic grease on them started going every other day. Had one guy run and only grease them twice a week, and that seemed to work really well. But you definitely polyurea or synthetic on walker blocks on the others. But here they do make a it's their big black grease that has moly in it. I can't remember what they're calling it. You could use that, but if you get to reading about that, it says it's not for high-speed roller bearings, which that's the whole combine. If you have a combine with a leveler on it, it works very good for all the leveling components because it will take the extreme pressure. But then you're using that one grease on that part of the combine, polyurea on the rest of it, whereas the polyurea I've even been happy with on the leveler portion. So, yeah.
And one thing on the moisture meters too, if you're getting a lot of junk in those, they've come up with an updated plunger on the end that now has rubber around it. The old plungers were just plastic and the sides would wear out, so you get a lot of debris built up inside that moisture meter on that plunger up top and up in the bulk tank. So now they have an updated one that has actually rubber around there, so it seals a lot better and keeps a lot cleaner up there. So.
Okay.
Could you show me where that plug goes in to put the street L in the transmission?
Yes. Not on this one. This has a Pro Drive.
Never mind. We'll get on another.
Yeah. We'll show you down on the 9600 down there, 9610.
Okay.
Okay. No other questions on this. We'll go down around the 9610.
Small enough to know you, large enough to serve you. Your locally owned John Deere dealer, Evergreen Implement.